This screencast supports this lesson on present perfect and time expressions, and it's taken from English Unlimited, Intermediate, by David Rea, R-E-A, and Teresa Clementson. And it is published by Cambridge. So the lesson starts off with a listening task, focusing on 3 people, talking about their achievements. So that's the topic of the lesson. And from that listening, we're going to be able to draw out some language which focuses on present perfect and time expressions. So that's the grammar element of the lesson. And then there will be some controlled and freer practice after the focus on the rules. So let's have a look in more detail at each stage. So we need to engage the learners in the topic of achievements. So create a short lead-in where that can be done. So you might ask them, for example, what's the biggest achievement? What's your biggest achievement this week? For example, something simple. And what are you most proud of? Is there something you're very proud of in your life? You could give them an example yourself and then just get them to speak together for a couple of minutes about their own ideas. Then we want to tell them that we're going to listen to 3 people speaking about their achievements and what they're most proud of. So introduce Aminata, Margot and Charlie, the 3 people that they're going to be listening to. Show them the photos just to set a little context for the listening. And have a look through the audio script to see if there's any blocking vocabulary that you might need to pre-teach. So check meaning or pronunciation of any words which are going to stop them from being able to do the tasks. There shouldn't be too much. So they're going to listen to the audio twice. First of all, they'll do exercise 1. And they just need to answer a gist question, listen to the audio and say what are they most proud of. So what are each of these people most proud of? So play the audio through, allow them to peer check and get some feedback. So that should be relatively straightforward. And then you can go into the more detailed listening task. So give them a little bit of time to just read through the questions that they need to answer. There are 2 questions for each person. Okay. And then tell them you're going to play the audio again and they need to note down their answers. If you feel it's helpful, you could pause the audio after each person just to give them a little bit of time to note their answers down. It's up to you. Again, allow them to peer check and get some answers, making sure that the answers are visible on the slide when you do feedback. If you feel you've got time, you could do exercise 3. Students could answer these 2 questions. But if you feel that you don't have time, it's absolutely fine to leave those questions out and move on to the language focus. So now the students can look at these 4 sentences which come from the audio. You might quickly want to ask them who said which one, if you want to. And get the students to look at the 4 sentences and to match each sentence with a function A or B. So you've got A and B here. A is a situation or state which is still true. B is a finished action which is important now. Both are uses of the present perfect. So they look at the sentences and decide is it A or B. Okay, and just write A or B next to them. They can do this together as a discussion activity, guided discovery, working out the rules, discussing the language. Check the answers and make sure that they're clear on the difference between the 2 uses, functions, and then they can move on to exercise 5, okay, which checks the meaning further. So they need to match the highlighted words in the 8 sentences from the audio with categories A to E on the right. Okay, so for example, one of the categories is the whole of your life until now. Okay, which time expressions? We can see that there are 2 because there are 2 gaps. Which time expressions would we use to speak about the whole of your life until now? So one of them is always, and elicit the second one as your example. Okay, so if they're talking about the whole of your life until now, which one is it? Okay, and they need to complete then, again, they can do this in as a whole group or in small groups, and decide which time expression goes in the gap from these sentences. Okay, now if you want to, you can set up both of these activities, both of these tasks together, and set them off into small groups to do both of them, and then check the answers to both tasks when you get everybody back together in feedback, because they all focus on meaning. Okay, so you might want to prepare some CCQs in addition to this, just in case you need them, just in case they're still struggling to differentiate between some of the time expressions. So now that we've focused on meaning, we need to look at form. So there are 2 separate areas of form we need to focus on. The first one is the form of the present perfect. Okay, now we've looked earlier at the meaning of the present perfect. Does it describe a situation or a state which is still true, or a finished action which is important now? It has lots of other meanings, the present perfect, but these are the 2 that we're focusing on in this lesson. We need to look at the form now. So I would get the students to look at the sentences again, okay, and elicit what tense is being used, first of all, and then give them a gapped sentence to fill in to work out the form. So for example, you might write on the slide, you might have the sentence, I have always wanted to write. And underneath that sentence, gap plus gap plus gap. So we're looking for a gap. The first gap would be the subject, I, he, she, you, we, etc. The second gap would be have or has, depending on the subject. And the third gap would be this, which is the past participle. Okay. That's what students need to know to be able to form the present perfect. Okay. Subject plus have or has plus past participle. To make sure they're clear on that. Then we need to look at where the time expressions fit into sentences using present perfect, because that's a bit more tricky. So that's another second element of form we need to look at. So we can move on to exercise 6 for that, which says, notice the position of the highlighted time expressions. It's important for students to know where these go in a sentence, and then add them to the sentences in the quiz. So we've got 8 quiz questions here, and the students have the time expressions in blue at the end, and they have to put the time expression into the correct place in the sentence. So for example, find someone who has won a competition. The book says to put recently at the end, which is fine, but of course it can also go here between the auxiliary have and the past participle. Find someone who has recently won a competition. They're both correct. Okay. Number 2, however, there's only one possibility. Find someone who has just passed a test or an exam. Okay, so just can't go at the end. So they can look back at the previous sentences they did in exercise 5 to help them if they want to. To refer to some examples. Get them to work together in small groups to put the time expression in the correct part of the sentence. Then do some feedback and check that they've understood the form of each one carefully. And then this leads us on nicely to the freer practice. So they've got their questions that they've worked on previously, and now they need to go into small groups and do the quiz. So this needs to be set up carefully with a clear demo. Choose a strong student to do the demonstration with in front of the whole class, and tell them that they're now going to, with these questions, they're going to ask the questions to find who the statements 1 to 8 are true for, and find out more about each situation. So, for example, I want to find someone who has never learned to drive, okay? I want to find someone who's never learned to drive. So I could ask my students, so what question do I need to ask? Question do I need to ask to find out this information from the others? And try and elicit from the students that I would actually ask, have you ever learned to drive? Okay, so I might choose a student in my group, if I was a student, and say, have you ever learned to drive? And do that demo with a student. So Erkan, have you ever learned to drive? Erkan might say, no, I haven't. Okay, so Erkan has never learned to drive. Good. Whereas I might ask another student, Maria, have you ever learned to drive? She might say yes. And I want to find out more information. So when did you learn? What do you think of driving in the UK? And from Erkan, I might say, why have you never learned to drive? And get some more reasoning from him, okay? So that I can feed that back later. And then demo another one. So I want to find someone who has recently won a competition. So what question would I ask? Elicit from the students. Have you recently won a competition? Or have you won a competition recently? Very good. Ask a student. See what they say. If they say they have, ask them what competition it was, what did they win, and if they haven't, you could ask them why don't they enter competitions. Okay, so you're just encouraging the students to get as much information around each question as possible. While they're doing the activity, make some notes on good uses of present perfect and time expressions that you hear and any errors that come up, and then get everybody back together and do some feedback. Ask the students to tell you what they found out about each other, and then do some post-fluency error correction with correct and incorrect sentences that you heard during your monitoring, and ask the students to identify the incorrect sentences and correct them.